what's up YouTube? Welcome to probably a premature top 3, but it is still a top 3 best league starters, and I do think that these will be the best league starters unless the patch notes is deviating from the norm where there's a bunch of random changes that they didn't actually list out in the balance manifesto. The biggest hope we have that these league starters will be different is definitely the presence of new skills, or maybe one of the buffed uniques adds a new build archetype into the game, like Omniscience. So you can see here, something I found on Reddit, it's the Lake. Now this is the full of buffs and Path of Exile, Lake of Kalandra patch notes. That's what we're all hoping for. But in the end, it's probably just a bunch of copium, and we're not really sure exactly what the patch notes will bring. But mainly I'm doing this video purely because people love the top 3 lists, right? People love knowing what the best league starters are. And this is kind of a precautionary video in the sense that you will see in this list that these builds are very, very similar to what we played last league and in 3.17. And if there's nothing groundbreaking in the patch notes, these builds will be identical and people will be league starting these top 3 builds. And there are some other builds I will mention at the end that are honorable mentions kind of, that I do think will still be played even though they are nerfed. Now, the patch notes are on August 11th, and they usually happen after the reveal. And if you actually watch the league launch reveal, you actually win. I think it's Wrangler Wings or something like that, so be sure to check that out. But without the big changes in the patch notes, here are the following top 3 in no particular order, actually. So, number 3, we have the favorite build of all time. And as you can see here, this is pretty much a video. I'm just playing the background for you guys to watch, just to see like the play style of the build and how it plays out. The gear is not really realistic for a league start scenario, and so don't pay too much attention to what the gear is. This is more of a play style demonstration. The Lightning Strike can be played on 3 different ascendancies. You can play it on Champion, you can play it on Raider, or you can play it on Berserker. Last league, I think Champion was actually the most popular ascendancy, but this time around, Champion did receive quite a few nerfs. More so than the other classes. Number 1, you have the Defiance banner nerf, the armor, and Champion does use Perseverance to get damage from percent armor and percent evasion. So if you actually look at it, Champion did probably lose around 50% of his damage if you don't find a way to overcome the Divine Blessing life tap. A lot of champions were using Adrenaline to be procced with Divine Blessing, but there's a lot of ways around it. You can do Divine Blessing with Eldritch Battery. You could also do Divine Blessing with Inspiration and reduced mana cost Flash and some mana cost nodes on the tree. So there are a lot of ways to make up for Champion's deficiencies now, but I do think that Champion will still be a strong option just because it's so tanky with Permanent Fortify. However, I do think that Berserker will be the best choice. I know I sound like a broken record. As long as you can handle the amount of buttons to press, Berserker will always remain the best choice in softcore for Lightning Strike. And I think Raider is actually pretty good too now because you get the suppression 40%, which actually has more value because they actually nerfed the suppression values on gear. And I do think that damage will be a bigger issue this time around than before because you are losing roughly like 30% damage on Omniscience. Roughly. And then like if you don't have the Divine Blessing aura and you're unable to actually fix that problem, then you're going to be losing another 25% there. And so you can see the damage loss kind of adds up. And another thing to note is that Recombinators allow you to get triple T1 LE weapons really easily. So our weapons will probably cause us to lose around 10 to 15% damage just because the rolls are going to be a lot worse. Now for this build, you do have to play Helix while leveling up. A lot of people don't like playing Spectral Helix, but Spectral Helix is definitely the best choice for leveling up for playing Lightning Strike. This build actually received almost 0 direct nerfs, and direct nerfs are something I categorize as GGG directly nerfing the build. So the only direct nerf you could say is maybe for Berserker Lightning Strike if you choose to use Secrets of Suffering, because Brittle now is capped at 6% instead of 15%. And this means that you'll probably have to invest in a medium crit cluster or something like that. So it's just something to keep in mind. This build out of the 3 probably has the best scaling potential into the end game, and it has by far the best map clear out of the top 3 builds that I'll be listing today. So this build is very good. If you're not sick of playing Lightning Strike still, I'm not going to league start this build as a precaution because I'm kind of sick of starting Berserker Lightning Strike, I think for 4 or 5 leagues in a row. But if you haven't played this before and you're looking for a super solid build that probably won't get nerfed in the Manifesto, be sure to check it out because I doubt that they'll sneak in a Nightblade change. And only thing that could happen is maybe a Lightning Strike damage effectiveness nerf. And if they actually decide to gut the skill, they could try to make it so you can't double hit with both the melee hit and projectile. But I feel like if with a change that drastic, they'd be pretty guaranteed to have included it in the Balanced Manifesto, but you never really know. Next up, we have the crowd favorite Seismic Trap. Now, this is a build that plagued the Gauntlet completely as people cleared. I think they won the Gauntlet on each class with Seismic Trap outside of Inquisitor, and I think even Witch was won by Occultist Seismic Trap. But basically, Seismic Trap, main issue is that it does too much damage. It has too much ways of scaling its damage with area overlap, with cooldown recovery, with increased durations, and the skill just has an incredible amount of base damage. So you can see here, this skill is really, really hard to kill off. And GGG's answer to nerfing Seismic Trap is completely ridiculous. If they go by what they are doing in the Balanced Manifesto, they are nerfing it with 30% cooldown recovery, which is a sizable nerf, but nowhere near enough to make it big enough difference. And you're also nerfing it with 29% duration, and this is done through Advanced Traps, the support gem. Now, this build is nerfed indirectly with Divine Blessing, Life Tap, Malevolence, but you will always be able to find a solution. A lot of people are actually theory crafting using Devouring Diadem in order to make up for the mana pool needed to do Divine Blessing, Life Tap. You could also technically run Ball Clarity, or you could do the Inspiration trick. So this build will still be very, very strong. I think a lot of people have said that it's around a 15 to 20% damage nerf roughly, or maybe less. And it's still the best single target ability in the game if you actually fully invest into it. And this is definitely a build that you should do if you want to prioritize doing bosses early on. You want to do the uber bosses, you want to farm some boss kills, or you want to sell some boss carries. And the nice part about this build is that even though you're pretty much limited to Saboteur, you can play this as Cold Conversion, which is definitely the higher damage route. Now, this time around, since Brittle ends up being nerfed, you do have to find some creative ways to get more crit, so it might be a little bit hard to do Cold Conversion. But you could also do Poison if you want to tank your character and the damage is still more than enough to do all content in the game. The biggest issue of this build is definitely the map clear is nothing to write home about, which is why this build kind of falls out of popularity if you look at PoE Ninja like a couple weeks into the league, because the map clear is just not that great. So unless you want to be a dedicated bosser or something like that, you will probably be swapping out of Seismic Trap a little bit into the league. So definitely consider this option if you want to play a build that just going to absolutely destroy Boston while offering average map clear with very low gear investment. Now, next up, we have the build that I do think is probably going to be the most popular league starter if there's not any changes, and that's purely because I do think that the damage you get per investment in terms of how much you have to invest in this build is just absolutely crazy. So this is Elementalist Detonate Dead into play Maul of Mischief for a single target. Now, I haven't done a full practice run with this character, so I'm not 100% sure how great it is, but from the numbers and talking to other streamers, the numbers are absolutely nuts for how much you actually have to invest in the character. So with this character, you probably level with Armageddon Brand and Cremation, and then you go into Elementalist Detonate Dead. Elementalist does appear to be the best ascendancy now for Detonate Dead, because Necromancer lost a lot of its corpse life, and Necromancer doesn't really get that much anymore. So Elementalist ends up being more damage. It should have better clear with the increased AoE. Obviously, not sure if they have increased area with Convergence, but basically, Detonate Dead's main weakness has always been the boss damage ever since they nerfed the skill. In that its boss damage is not spectacular unless you're using like all quality gems with Unearth. And I do think that your damage is capped out pretty early on at like 3 mil DPS. It's probably going to be even lower now with the changes. So probably like 2 to 3 mil DPS with League Star gear. And what this means is that you can leverage how amazing Detonate Dead is for mapping, because Detonate Dead will still be insanely good for mapping even with the nerfs. And you can do that. You can finish the Atlas progression, and then you can swap over to Maw of Mischief, which is a helm made by Bex. And you can see here, this actually allows you to have a pseudo 6-link in a 4-link helmet. You can see it grants level 20 Death Wish, and then you socket in the support skill gems into this helmet, and you have a 5-link Death Wish. So what Death Wish actually does is it makes it so you can blow up your minions. So the reason you play Elementalist is you can summon your Stone Golems. And I think it summons it automatically. You can also use Herald of Purity for mapping, so you can blow up the Purity minions that get summoned from the Herald. So you can see mapping is you're kind of like a kamikaze bomber. You summon the Stone Golems and they're aggressive to minions next to you, and you blow it up. And the explosion does a bunch of ignite damage. And the ignite damage leads to some pretty incredible single target, as you can see here at the start. This guy here is, I think he has pretty good gear, but I'm not entirely sure. But you can see here the damage is absolutely crazy. Ventura actually did some runs on it, and I think he was doing like Uber Mavens, and the boss was literally like instantly dying. I mean, his gear was decent, but the damage is absolutely incredible. You could probably reach up to 25 mil plus Ignite DPS with perfect gear, and you can get like 10 mil Ignite DPS pretty easily with League Star gear. Now, this build can actually even do Simulacrum Wave 30. I have seen it in videos. And the biggest problem is like the defenses are a little bit hard to solve, but when you have like 10 mil plus Ignite DPS, the bosses are literally just going to melt. Ignite DPS is much better than like Lightning Strike DPS, purely because the damage uptime is almost going to be up 100% of the time, as long as you have to ignite on the enemy. Now, the big problem with this build is definitely the map clear is nothing to write home about. It's kind of like playing Detonate Dead. It's almost like a 2-button ability, in that you have to wait for your minions or golems to spawn, or your hero purities to spawn, and then you blow it up. There is like some skill difference in playstyle. I do know from what I've seen in videos, some people wait for too many minions to blow up instead of just blowing up a few golems or one golem and some heralds. So it ends up being kind of a skill gap thing in terms of how your map clear will look. And I have seen a lot of videos, and there is a pretty drastic difference between map clear speed between how you play the build. Now, another thing to keep in mind is Maw of Mischief could be a very expensive item. It's mostly found in Cemetery map, and people pull it from stack decks. It's from a div card called Cursed Words, and it's 13 of them. So if Cemetery is not in the map pool, and there's not people magic finding it, it's gonna be a lot harder to get the helmet, and the helmet was probably already around nearly 1x on day one. So it could be like a multi-X helmet on day one, and it'll probably drop down significantly as we go into day 2 and 3. But even if it is an Exalt or 2 Exalts, the damage you get will allow you to do Uber bosses a lot easier than some of these other League starters you might be seeing. So overall, those are my picks currently for the top 3 League starters. So if you want to try practicing, you could. Out of the 3 that I listed, I do think that the most likely to be nerfed is definitely Seismic Trap. And if they touch Lightning Strike without mentioning it in the Balance Manifesto, I would be surprised, but you never know with GGG. And if anyone's asking about RF and Explosive Arrow Totem, they're still more than fine. I know that Pox made a pretty copious video about Righteous Fire damage. And Righteous Fire, I think he says, lost around 20% damage. Some people say it's a little bit more with the Fire Trap nerf. But somewhere around there, Explosive Arrow Totems have around the same damage losses, around 20%. So I do think that both of them are fine League starters. They're just not like super S-tier League starters. And you will notice the single target DPS difference. Now, as always, this is all subject to change depending on the patch notes. But the patch notes have followed the Balance Manifesto very, very closely in the past few patch notes. So take that with a grain of salt or whatever, but I do think that GGG is probably satisfied with the Balance Manifesto, and they do think that the patch notes and league mechanics and new uniques will shake up the meta. And this is actually the most important thing. Make sure to choose your league starter to match your goals for the leagues. And each league starter has different strengths. Like Lightning Strike is more of an all-rounder. Seismic Trap is more of a bosser. Maw of Mischief is definitely more of a bosser than a mapper. So if you want to do bossing, make sure to choose a league starter that's strong in bossing. If you want to do magic fighting later, make sure to choose a league starter that starts on a ranger so you can swap over to Deadeye. So that's something to keep in mind if you don't like leveling up new characters. Make sure to align your league starter with the goals you have at league start. So don't choose a mapper if you really want to. Just don't choose like Seismic Trap if you really care about doing juice maps because it's not going to feel very good. But thanks for watching, everyone. Just keep in mind all of these top 3 builds are preliminary and are subject to change if GGG announces something in the patch notes. But I just wanted to showcase them real fast just to give people a general idea of what we're looking at if they don't make any drastic changes. But thanks for watching. I hope you find more Mirrors, Exalts, and Mage Bloods than me, and see you next time. Bye!